The morning dawned with the scent of fresh fruit and the sounds of hurried people. The market was bustling with colours and voices, a familiar scene for someone who just wanted to hide among the stalls and vanish for a few minutes from her own heart. She walked with a lost gaze, trying to breathe, until the past approached with confident steps and an arrogant smile. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The morning wind carried the sweet scent of ripe mangoes, mingling with the rough murmur of voices negotiating prices. Caroline walked slowly between the stalls, her nervous fingers playing with her purse strap, her chest tight with a feeling she couldn't name. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't a rush. It was that familiar anxiety that always arrived whenever she had to leave the house, face the world, pretend she was fine. The downtown market stretched like a labyrinth of colours and movements, each stall a small island of life. She liked that place because she could get lost there, be just another person buying tomatoes or choosing bananas, without anyone asking how she was or why her eyes always seemed laden with rain. It had been 3 months since the breakup. 3 months since she discovered that the man with whom she had shared 5 years of her life was cheating on her with his secretary, a blonde with a fake smile and perfect nails. 3 months since her self-esteem had been crushed like crumpled paper and thrown in the trash. The tears no longer came, but the pain lingered, settled in her chest like a constant weight. She had lost not just a boyfriend, but confidence in herself, the belief that she could be enough for someone. That's when she saw him. Robert walked towards her with that smile she knew so well. That same smile he used when he lied about working late, about meetings that never existed, about a love that had died long before she found out. On his arm, like a trophy, was her, the blonde, the secretary, the woman who now occupied the place that was once hers. Time seemed to slow down, like in movies. The market's noise became a distant echo. Voices transformed into incomprehensible murmurs. Caroline's heart pounded so hard she was afraid everyone could hear it. They hadn't seen her yet, but it was a matter of seconds. Robert was talking animatedly with his new girlfriend, pointing to a fruit stall, laughing at something she had said. The same laugh he used to have when he was truly happy, the same laugh she thought was solely hers. Panic spread through Caroline's body like a cold wave. She wasn't ready for that encounter, wasn't prepared to feign indifference, to smile and greet as if nothing had happened. She couldn't imagine herself standing there, trying to appear strong while he displayed his new happiness like a conquest. Her eyes desperately searched for an exit, a path to escape unseen. But they were too close now. Robert raising his head, his eyes beginning to sweep the area. That's when she saw him. At the fruit stall next door, a man arranged oranges in a perfect pile. Large, careful hands, a simple faded blue cotton shirt, dark hair messed by the wind. There was something in his posture, in the concentrated way he worked, that conveyed a calm she hadn't felt in months. He looked up at that moment, as if he had sensed he was being watched. His gaze met hers, and for an instant, Caroline saw something that made her forget the panic. It wasn't pity. It wasn't invasive curiosity. It was understanding, as if that unknown man could see right through her and understand exactly what was happening. Robert was just a few feet away now. She could hear his familiar voice approaching, could see out of the corner of her eye the blonde adjusting her hair, preparing for the inevitable encounter. There was no time to think, only to act. Caroline walked to the orange man's stall, her heart pounding like a desperate drum. She approached him, looked directly into his clear brown eyes, and said the words that would change everything. "Pretend to be my boyfriend." The request came out as an urgent whisper, laden with vulnerability and desperation. She saw surprise pass through his eyes, saw him process what he had heard, saw the exact moment he understood the situation. And then, without hesitation, without asking questions, he simply nodded. The man wiped his hands on his apron, took a step towards her and, with a delicacy that surprised her, placed his right hand on her waist. The touch was firm but respectful, protective without being possessive. "All right," he whispered back, his voice deep and calm. "Whatever you need." And then he smiled. It wasn't a forced or theatrical smile, but something natural and warm, as if they really had known each other for years, as if that moment had been orchestrated by destiny. Caroline felt something loosen inside her chest. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone facing life's storms. There was someone there by her side, willing to enter her temporary lie without judgment. Robert appeared in her line of vision at that exact moment, his smile dying on his lips when he saw her with another man. The blonde beside him frowned, clearly confused by the scene unfolding before them. "Caroline." Robert's voice sounded uncertain, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She turned to him, still leaning against the fruit vendor, feeling the warmth of his hand on her waist like an anchor that held her in place. "Robert," she replied, her voice firmer than she expected. "What a surprise to see you here." The man beside her extended his free hand towards Robert, maintaining a calm smile on his face. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice carrying a natural confidence. "I'm Daniel." Robert shook his hand automatically, still processing the situation. His eyes moved between Caroline and Daniel, trying to understand when this had happened, how he had lost control of the narrative he thought he knew. The blonde moved closer, possessive, her arm intertwining with Robert's as if marking territory. "I didn't know you were seeing someone," Robert said, his voice laced with something that could be surprise or jealousy. Caroline felt Daniel lightly squeeze her waist, a small but comforting gesture. "There are some things you don't know about me," she replied, and for the first time in months she felt she had control of the conversation. The encounter lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. There were polite greetings, a few words about how life was going well for everyone, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The tension in the air was palpable, like electricity before a storm. When Robert and the blonde finally walked away, Caroline felt her legs weaken. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the encounter began to dissipate, leaving her dizzy and confused. Daniel slowly removed his hand from her waist, respecting her space, but remained close, as if understanding she still needed support. "Thank you," Caroline whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know how to thank you." He shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "No need to thank me. Anyone would do the same." But Caroline knew that wasn't true. Most people would have walked away, would have avoided getting involved in a stranger's drama. Daniel had chosen to help her without hesitation, without asking for explanations. She watched him. For a moment, noticing details she had missed in the desperation of the previous minutes, the calloused hands of someone who worked hard, the simple but clean shirt, the eyes that seemed to hold stories she would like to know. "I should go," she said, suddenly conscious that she had interrupted his work, that she had invaded a stranger's life with her problems. "Of course," Daniel replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested he didn't want her to leave. Caroline took a few steps back, still looking at him, trying to etch that face into her memory. The man who had saved her dignity, who had given her back a little of the power she thought she had lost forever. "Maybe," she began, then stopped, uncertain. "I work here every morning," Daniel said, as if he could read her thoughts. "If you ever want to chat, or if you need some more oranges." She smiled, a genuine smile she hadn't felt in months. "Maybe I will," she replied. And then she walked away, carrying not only the relief of having survived the encounter with Robert, but also the strange and new sensation that something had begun there. Among the fresh fruit and the market's buzz, the following days passed like a thick fog in Caroline's mind. She woke up thinking about the man at the fruit stand, about the way he had placed his hand on her waist so naturally, as if it was something he had done for years. In work meetings, her mind wandered to that moment, to the feeling of not being alone that she had long forgotten. Daniel. He had said his name was Daniel. 3 times she passed in front of the market, pretending to have other things to do nearby. 3 times she lost the courage to go in, to look for him among the stalls. There was something too vulnerable about returning, like admitting that simple gesture had affected her more than it should have. On Thursday, the rain came early, turning the streets into grey mirrors. Caroline had left work early, and without a definite destination, found herself walking towards the market again. This time, there was no plan, no ready excuses. Just the need to see if that moment had been real, or just a fantasy her mind had created to endure the pain. The market was emptier. Because of the rain. Fewer people, less noise, more intimacy among the stalls covered by colourful tarps. She found him arranging boxes of apples, his movements careful and precise, like someone who had done it thousands of times. When he looked up and saw her, the smile that appeared on his face was like sunshine after a storm. "The oranges have improved since last time," he said, without awkwardness, as if they had seen each other just yesterday. "I was just passing by," Caroline lied, and they both knew it was a lie. Daniel dried his hands on a clean cloth and approached her. There was something different in his posture today, less formal, more relaxed, as if the ice had been broken at that first meeting. "Want some coffee?" he asked, pointing to a small thermos behind the counter. "I always make a little more than I can drink." Caroline nodded, and he poured the coffee into 2 simple plastic cups. The liquid was hot and strong, with that homemade coffee taste she hadn't had in years. "How are you?" Daniel asked, and there was a sincerity in the question that surprised her. It wasn't social courtesy, it was genuine interest. "Better," she replied, and realized it was true. "That day, you saved me from a very embarrassing situation." "I didn't save anything." Daniel shook his head. "I just helped someone who needed help. Anyone would do the same." But Caroline knew that wasn't true. She had seen how people behaved when someone needed help. Most looked away, pretended not to see, moved on, protecting their own comfort. "Have you known him long?" Daniel asked, his voice careful, testing if she wanted to talk about it. 5 years, Caroline replied, surprising herself with the ease of the confession. 5 years I thought meant something. Daniel said nothing, just nodded, and she realized he understood. There was something in the way he listened, in the patience of his eyes, that made her want to keep talking. "I found out he was cheating on me 3 months ago. With his secretary." The words came out more bitterly than she intended. "Cliché, right?" "Pain isn't cliché," Daniel replied. "Pain is pain, no matter how many people have gone through the same thing." They fell silent for a moment, the sound of the rain creating a melancholic soundtrack for the conversation. Caroline watched. Daniel's hands, holding the coffee cup, noticed the small scars on his fingers, the way he kept his shoulders always slightly hunched, as if carrying some invisible weight. "What about you?" she asked. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years, he replied, but there was something in his voice that suggested that wasn't the whole story. "Did you always want to work with fruit?" Caroline tried to keep the tone light, but felt she had touched on something delicate. Daniel laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "Not exactly. Sometimes life takes us to places we don't plan. It Was a vague answer, but Caroline respected his space. She had learned, in the most painful way possible, that forcing intimacy was a sure way to drive people away. "Do you have family here in town?" she asked, trying to move to safer ground. Daniel's expression subtly changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight hardening around his eyes, an almost imperceptible pause before he answered. "I do," he said simply. And Caroline knew instinctively that there was something important in that answer that he wasn't ready to share. They talked for another hour about simple things, the market, the rain, the funny customers who appeared during the week. Daniel had a sense of humor, a quiet way of telling stories that made her genuinely laugh for the first time in months. When she finally said goodbye, she promised to come back next week to buy real fruit. "You don't need to make excuses," Daniel said, with that smile that was already becoming familiar. "You can just come to talk." The following Friday, Caroline returned, and on Tuesday the week after, and on Thursday after that. Always with some small purchase, some bananas, a few apples, oranges for juice she never made, but mostly for the impromptu coffees and the conversations that stretched longer with each meeting. Daniel was a comforting presence in her life. He listened when she needed to vent about work, laughed at her unfunny stories, offered perspectives she hadn't considered. There was something about him that made her feel seen, understood, accepted exactly as she was. But there were also mysteries. He never talked about his life after work. When she asked about weekend plans, he changed the subject. When she suggested they meet outside the market, he made polite but firm excuses. He always left early, always seemed to have somewhere important to be. Caroline began to notice small details she hadn't noticed at first. The cheap watch on his wrist, but which he checked constantly, as if he had strict commitments. The way he sometimes looked at his phone with an expression that mixed anxiety and tenderness. The way he talked about responsibilities without ever specifying what they were. There were also moments when she caught him with a distant look, as if he was thinking about something or someone very important. In these moments, she felt there were entire layers of Daniel's life that remained invisible to her. But strangely, it didn't bother her. There was something comforting in his mysterious presence, in the way he was completely present during conversations, but kept parts of himself protected. It was the opposite of Robert, who seemed to give himself completely but, in the end, had kept the most important secrets. Daniel was honest about being reserved, and that, in a paradoxical way, made her trust him. It was on a rainy Thursday, similar to the one they first reconnected, that Caroline realized something had changed within her. She was leaving work, thinking about stopping by the market, when she realized she wasn't going there anymore because of loneliness or the need to escape her problems. She was going because she wanted to see Daniel. Simply that. The discovery scared and thrilled her at the same time. It had been months since she had felt genuine interest in someone, since she had looked forward to a meeting, since she had caught herself smiling for no reason, remembering a conversation. When she arrived at the market that day, Daniel was helping an elderly woman choose pineapples. He had infinite patience, explaining how to identify if the fruit was ripe, carrying her groceries to the market entrance, even in the rain. Caroline watched the scene from afar, feeling something warm in her chest. There was genuine kindness in that man, a gentleness that wasn't a performance, but an essential part of who he was. When he returned and saw her waiting, the smile that appeared on his face was different, warmer, more intimate, as if her presence was the best part of his day. "I thought you wouldn't come today because of the rain," he said, pouring coffee for both of them. I thought so too," Caroline replied, "but I came anyway." They looked at each other for a moment, and there was something unsaid in the air between them, a mutual awareness that this had become more than casual conversations between acquaintances. "Daniel," Caroline began, then hesitated. "What is it?" he asked gently. I'd like to get to know you better. Beyond here, you know." She saw the internal struggle in his eyes. She saw the wanting and the fear, the attraction and the hesitation. "Caroline," he began, his voice more serious than usual. "It doesn't have to be anything complicated," she hastened to say. "Just dinner or coffee somewhere else, just so we can talk without the rush of customers." Daniel was silent for a long moment, looking at his own hands, clearly wrestling with some internal decision. "There are some things about me you don't know," he finally said. "There are some things about me you don't know either," Caroline replied. "That's what dates are for, aren't they?" He looked up at her, and Caroline saw vulnerability there, as if he was preparing to tell her something important and scary. But before he could speak, his phone rang. The sound cut the moment like a blade. Daniel looked at the screen, and his expression changed completely, from vulnerable to worried, from hesitant to urgent. "I need to take this," he said, already moving away. "Dad?" Caroline heard the voice coming from the phone, high-pitched, young, clearly a child's. "Are you coming to pick me up?" And suddenly everything made sense. Daniel moved a few steps away, phone glued to his ear, his voice low and affectionate, contrasting with the tension that had taken over his body. "Calm down, Leo. Dad will pick you up in 5 minutes, okay? Stay with Aunt Martha until I get there." Caroline felt the world rearrange around her. Dad. Daniel was a dad. All the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The strict schedules, the constantly checked watch, the way he avoided commitments, the way he spoke about responsibilities without specifying. He hung up the phone and came back to her, his face filled with a mix of shame and fear she had never seen before. "I have to go," he said, avoiding her gaze. "My son, he gets out of school now and—" "It's okay," Caroline responded automatically, still processing the information. Daniel began to pack up his stall with hurried movements, putting away the leftover fruit, folding the cloth that covered the counter. His hands trembled slightly, and she realized he was afraid of her reaction. "Daniel," she said softly. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, prepared for what he imagined would come. The distancing, the polite excuses, the inevitable flight he had experienced other times. "How old is he?" Caroline asked. The question caught him off guard. It wasn't what he expected. 7, he replied cautiously. "He'll be 8 in December." Caroline nodded, absorbing the information. 7 years old, a small child, completely dependent on his father, who needed to be picked up from school, who had absolute priority in Daniel's life. "You need to go pick him up," she said. "You can't be late." Daniel looked at her for a moment, as if trying to understand if she was being sincere or just polite. Yes, I do," he confirmed. "Go," Caroline said, with a smile that tried to hide the confusion she felt inside. "We'll talk later." He hesitated for another second, then nodded and hurried away, leaving her alone among the empty stalls and the smell of rain that was beginning to intensify. Caroline stood there for a few minutes, trying to organize her thoughts. Daniel had a son, a 7-year-old son who called him Dad, with that sweet, urgent voice she had heard on the phone. This changed everything. Or did it? She walked slowly to the market exit, her mind swirling with questions she hadn't dared to ask. Where was the child's mother? Was Daniel divorced, separated, widowed? Was there an entire family she knew nothing about? That night, Caroline barely slept. She lay, looking at the ceiling, replaying every conversation she had had with Daniel, looking for signs she had missed, clues about this part of his life that had remained hidden. She remembered the way he had talked about responsibilities, about how life sometimes took people to unplanned places. She remembered how he always seemed to be in a hurry to finish work, how he was never available on weekends, and she remembered, too, the affection in his voice when he answered the phone. The genuine tenderness, the immediate concern, the way he had dropped everything to go get the boy. Friday, Caroline didn't go to the market. She stayed at work late, found excuses to spend the weekend organizing things at home, avoided thinking too much about what she had discovered. But on Monday, the need to see him was stronger than the confusion. She arrived at the market earlier than usual and found him arranging the fruit, his movements more cautious than usual. When he saw her, there was a moment of hesitation before the smile appeared. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied. They looked at each other for a moment, the weight of what hadn't been said hanging between them. "Want some coffee?" Daniel asked, as he always did. "Yes," Caroline replied. He poured the coffee in silence, and she noticed there was something different in his posture. There was sadness there, resignation, as if he was already preparing to lose something he had begun to value. "You want to know about my son," he said, getting straight to the point. "Only if you want to tell me," Caroline replied honestly. Daniel took a deep breath, as if preparing for a difficult confession. "His name is Leonardo, Leo. He's 7 years old, and he's the most important thing in my life." The words came out full of love and protection. His mother. She left us when he was 2, decided she wasn't ready to be a mother, that she wanted a different life. Caroline felt her chest tighten. There was so much pain in those simple words, so much weight in everything he wasn't saying. "Since then, it's just been the 2 of us," Daniel continued. "I work here because I need flexible hours, because I can drop him off at school and pick him up on time. Because when he gets sick, I can miss work, without having to answer to anyone." He paused, looking at his own hands. "I know it's not easy for a woman to accept a man with a child. I know it's a complication. It's extra responsibility. It means dividing attention and time. That's why I didn't say anything before." Caroline watched him as he spoke, seeing the vulnerability in every word, the fear of rejection he tried to hide behind the practical explanation. "You're afraid I'll leave," she said, and it wasn't a question. Daniel looked up at her, and there was so much honesty there that Caroline felt like hugging him. "I am," he admitted. "I shouldn't have gotten involved. I shouldn't have let it get this far without telling the truth. But I like you, Caroline. I like talking to you. I like the way you make me feel when we're together. And a part of me wanted to pretend I could have that, at least for a while." His words touched something deep in Caroline's heart. There was so much honesty in that confession. So much courage in admitting he had grown attached, despite knowing it was risky. "What's his name?" she asked, softly. "Leonardo," Daniel repeated, and this time there was a small smile on his lips. "But everyone calls him Leo. He's amazing, Caroline. He's smart, curious, has the most beautiful laugh in the world. He loves to draw, especially cars and superheroes. He's brave, but he's still afraid of the dark. He likes orange juice and hates broccoli." As Daniel spoke about his son, his entire posture changed. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes came alive, his voice filled with pride and love. It was impossible not to see how that child was the center of his universe. "He sounds wonderful," Caroline said. And it was true. "He is," Daniel replied. "But he's also a lot of responsibility. It's not just about me, you know. Any decision I make, anyone I let into our lives affects him too. And I've seen what happens when a child gets attached to someone who then leaves. I don't want him to go through that again." Caroline understood what he was saying. It wasn't just about her accepting or not accepting that he had a son. It was about her understanding that if she wanted to be in Daniel's life, she would automatically be in the life of a child who had already been abandoned once. "Can I ask you a question?" she said. Daniel nodded. "Have you ever brought other people to meet him?" "One," Daniel replied honestly. 2 years ago. We dated for a few months, and I thought it was serious enough for her to meet Leo. He really liked her. He started asking when she was coming back, if she was staying for dinner, if he could call her aunt." Daniel paused, the pain visible in his eyes. "When she broke up with me, he didn't understand. He spent weeks asking where she was, if she didn't like us anymore. After that, I decided I would be more careful." Carolyn felt her heart ache, imagining that small child confused by yet another abandonment in his life. "I understand," she said. "You're protecting him." "I am," Daniel confirmed, "but I was also protecting myself. It's easier not to get involved than to risk hurting him again, or risking hurting myself again." They fell silent for a moment, the weight of honesty hanging between them. "And now?" Caroline asked. "Now you know," Daniel replied. "And I understand if this is too much, if you want to." "Daniel," she interrupted softly, "I'm not leaving because you have a son." He looked at her, surprised. "You're not?" "No," Caroline replied, with more certainty than she felt. "That's not a bad thing. It's part of who you are, and I'd like to get to know that part of your life if you let me." Daniel was silent for a long moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you sure?" he asked, vulnerable. Caroline took a deep breath. She wasn't sure of anything, really. She didn't know what it meant to get involved with a man who had a child. She didn't know if she was ready for that responsibility. She didn't know if she would be able to win the heart of a child who had already suffered losses. But she knew she wanted to try. She knew Daniel had become important to her in a way that surprised her, and she knew that fleeing now would be a cowardice she wouldn't be able to forgive herself for. "I'm sure I want to try," she replied. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." The smile that appeared on Daniel's face was like the sunrise after a long, difficult night. It was relief, gratitude, and hope mixed in an expression she would never forget. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not running away, for giving me a chance to explain, for—" He hesitated. "For being you." Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had thanked her just for being herself, for being present, for choosing to stay instead of fleeing. "When can I meet him?" she asked. The question caught Daniel by surprise, and she saw a new kind of nervousness, a beer in his eyes. You really want to meet him?" "I do," Caroline replied, "if you want me to." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to make sure she wasn't just being polite. "He's going to like you," he finally said. "How can you be sure?" "Because I like you," Daniel replied simply, "and he always notices when someone makes me happy." The confession caught them by surprise. They looked at each other, aware that something important had been said, something that changed the tone of everything between them. "You make me happy," Daniel repeated, softer this time. "You make me happy too," she replied. And there, between the smell of fresh fruit and the distant sound of the city waking up, they knew they had crossed an important line. It was no longer just about casual conversations or physical attraction. It was about two people who had decided to try to build something real together, even knowing it wouldn't be simple. Saturday arrived laden with nervousness and anticipation. Caroline had changed her outfit 3 times before leaving the house, unsure what impression to make on a 7-year-old. Nothing too formal, nothing too sloppy. In the end, she chose a light blue blouse and jeans, something that made her feel comfortable and natural. Daniel had suggested they meet at the park near Leo's school. "It's his favorite place," he had explained. "If he gets nervous or doesn't want to talk, at least he can play." And if everything goes well, we can get ice cream afterward." The simplicity of the plan reassured her. There was no pressure, no grand expectations. Just an afternoon at the park, getting to know the most important person in the life of the man she was starting to like. Caroline arrived a few minutes before the agreed time and watched the children playing on the playground. It had been so long since she had been around children that she had almost forgotten how they were pure energy and sincerity. There was no pretense, no complex adult games. A child liked or disliked, trusted or distrusted, and it became clear in seconds. "Aunt Caroline!" The high-pitched voice made her turn. A boy with dark hair and big eyes ran towards her, followed by Daniel, who tried to hide his nervousness behind a smile. Leo stopped a few feet from her, suddenly shy. He was smaller than she had imagined, with the round face typical of children, and there was something familiar in the way he twisted his hands when he was nervous, exactly like his father did. "Hi, Leo," Caroline said, crouching down to his level. "Your dad told me a lot about you." "He said you're his girlfriend," Leo said, getting straight to the point, in the way only children can. Caroline looked at Daniel, who turned red. "I said you're a special friend," Daniel hastened to clarify. "A friend that Dad likes very much." "It's the same thing," Leo replied pragmatically. "Carly from my class says that when adults say they're special friends, it's because they're dating but don't want to say." Caroline laughed, unable not to be charmed by the child's crystal-clear logic. "Carly sounds very smart," she said. "She is," Leo confirmed. "She can read words with more than 5 letters. During the first hour in the park, Caroline mainly observed. Leo was a typical 7-year-old, full of energy, curious about everything, capable of changing the subject 3 times in the same sentence. He showed her his favorite toys, explained the complicated rules of a game he had invented, told her about his classmates with the seriousness of someone discussing very important matters. Daniel, meanwhile, alternated between pride and nervousness. Caroline could see how he observed every interaction, ready to intervene if necessary, but also clearly moved to see the 2 most important people in his life getting to know each other. "Do you like to draw?" Leo suddenly asked Caroline, pulling a small notebook from his backpack. "I do, but I'm not very good," she replied honestly. "Me neither," Leo said, opening the notebook. "But Dad says you don't have to be good. You just have to like it." He showed her the drawings, cars that looked like colorful boxes, people who were basically stick figures with round heads, houses with crooked windows, and chimneys that released spirals of smoke. "This one's my dad," Leo said, pointing to one of the stick figures. "And this is our house. And this one," he turned the page, "is a drawing I made yesterday after Dad said you were coming to meet us." Caroline looked at the drawing. It was clearly a park with triangular play structures representing slides and circles that were seesaws. There were 3 stick figures, a tall one, a small one, and a medium one. The small one was in the middle, holding the hands of the other 2. "That's us 3, Leo explained, as if it were obvious. "Me, Dad, and you." Caroline felt her chest tighten with the simplicity and hope of that drawing. A child who still believed that people could simply appear in his life and stay, that drawing something could make it real. "Can I keep this drawing?" she asked. "You can," Leo replied, tearing the sheet from the notebook. "But will you give it back when we see each other again?" "No," Caroline said. "If you give it to me, I'll keep it forever, but only if you really want to give it to me." Leo thought for a moment, with the seriousness of someone considering an important decision. "You can keep it," he decided, "but you have to promise you'll take good care of it." "I promise," Caroline replied, and realized she was genuinely moved. Daniel, who had observed the exchange in silence, approached them. "How about we go get some ice cream?" he suggested. "Yes!" Leo shouted, all initial shyness completely forgotten. At the ice cream parlor, Leo strategically positioned himself between Caroline and Daniel at the table, as if he were the official mediator of the situation. He asked unfiltered questions. If Caroline liked pizza, yes. If she knew how to drive, yes. If she had children, no. If she wanted to have children. Caroline hesitated, and Leo lost interest in the question before she could answer. "My dad's really strong," Leo announced suddenly, licking his chocolate ice cream. "Once he carried 3 boxes of bananas by himself." "Wow," Caroline responded, appropriately impressed. "And he can make pancakes without looking at the recipe," Leo continued, clearly listing his father's qualities for the potential girlfriend. "How talented," Caroline said, looking at Daniel, who was blushing again. "And he sings when he's doing the dishes, but he thinks I don't hear him," Leo added triumphantly. "Leo?" Daniel mumbled, embarrassed. "What does he sing?" Caroline asked, amused. "Radio songs. Sometimes he makes up the lyrics when he forgets," Leo replied. "It's really funny." Caroline laughed, imagining Daniel singing alone in the kitchen, trying to remember song lyrics. There was something incredibly human and sweet in that image. After ice cream, they returned to the park. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. Leo played on the slide, his energy seemingly inexhaustible, while Caroline and Daniel sat on a nearby bench. "How's it going?" Daniel asked softly. "He's amazing," Caroline replied honestly. "He's exactly as you described, smart, funny, affectionate. And you? How are you feeling?" Caroline thought for a moment before answering. "Nervous," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of nervous, like when you're about to do something important and you're afraid of messing it up, but you know it's worth trying." Daniel smiled. "He liked you," he said. "You can tell. When he doesn't like someone, he sticks to me and doesn't say anything. Today, he barely stopped talking." "Dad!" Leo shouted from across the park. "Come see how I can go down backwards." "Don't go down backwards," Daniel shouted back, already standing up. "You'll get hurt." But Leo had already slid down, laughing loudly, completely unharmed. "This kid is going to scare me to death," Daniel murmured, walking to where Leo was. Caroline watched them interact, Daniel pretending to be mad but clearly relieved, Leo justifying himself with the convoluted logic of children about why going down backwards was perfectly safe. There was so much love in that dynamic, so much patience and protection mixed with fun. When it was time to leave, Leo protested as any child would, but without making a scene. Daniel had raised that boy well, had created clear and respectful boundaries. "Aunt Caroline," Leo said when they reached the car, "are you coming back to play with us?" Caroline looked at Daniel, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If you want me to come back," she replied. "I do," Leo said, determined, "but next time can you bring your own? Colored pencils? Mine are getting small from so much use." "I can," Caroline laughed. "What colors do you like most?" "All of them," Leo replied, "but especially blue, because it's the color of the sky, and green, because it's the color of the grass, and red, because it's the color of the heart." On the way home, Caroline couldn't stop thinking about the profound simplicity of Leo's observations. Blue like the sky, green like the grass, red like the heart. A child who saw the world in primary colors, who believed that things could be simple and good. When Daniel dropped her off at home, they stayed in the car for a few minutes in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Daniel said. "For what?" "For being so natural with him, for not pretending interest or trying to impress, for being you." Caroline smiled. He made it easy to like him. "So now what?" "Now," Caroline said, looking at the drawing she still held in her hands, "now I really do want to come back to play with you guys." Daniel smiled. And there was something different in his posture, less tense, more hopeful. "Next Sunday?" he asked. "Next Sunday, Caroline?" "Confirmed." When she entered her house that night, Caroline taped Leo's drawing to the refrigerator next to a photo of her with friends. There, the three stick figures of different sizes holding hands in the park seemed to promise something she didn't know if she was ready to accept, but which for the first time in a long time made her want to believe in happy endings. Maybe it wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was about being willing to try, one Sunday at a time, one ice cream at a time, one drawing at a time. And for the first time since Robert had cheated on her, Caroline fell asleep not thinking about the past, but about the future, about Sundays at the park, about new colored pencils, about a boy who thought red was the color of the heart, and a man who sang to himself while doing the dishes. The following weeks passed like a careful dance between three people learning to live together. Caroline started becoming part of Daniel and Leo's Sundays, first just at the park, then on small trips to the mall, to the movies to watch animated films she found she enjoyed more than she expected. Leo had completely lost his initial shyness. Now he greeted her with enthusiastic hugs and had developed the habit of saving special drawings throughout the week to show her on weekends. Caroline, in turn, had bought a box of professional colored pencils and discovered that drawing alongside a child was surprisingly therapeutic. Daniel watched it all with a mix of admiration and incredulity. There were nights he woke up in the middle of a sleep, wondering if he wasn't dreaming, if he'd really found someone who not only accepted his complicated life, but seemed genuinely happy being part of it. It was on a Thursday that everything changed. Caroline was at the market, as had become routine, talking with Daniel as he arranged the last boxes of the day, when Leo appeared running between the stalls. It wasn't his time to be there, and the expression on his small face mixed confusion and suppressed tears. "Dad," he said out of breath, "Aunt Martha said you'd be mad, but I left school and came looking for you because—" "Leo," Daniel interrupted, crouching down to his son's level. "What happened? Why aren't you at Martha's house?" "I told Carly about Aunt Caroline," Leo explained, the words tumbling out. "And she said her mom told her that when dads get new girlfriends, they forget about their kids and then leave to start a new family." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Caroline saw the change in his expression, the way he quickly looked at her and then back at Leo. "And then Carly asked if you were going to have babies with Aunt Caroline, and if you were going to give me to my real mom because you wouldn't have time for me anymore," Leo continued, tears finally escaping. "And I said you wouldn't do that, but what if you do? What if you leave like Mom did?" The silence that followed was heavy with weight. Caroline felt as if a stone had lodged in her chest. There was a cruel logic in the child's words, fears she hadn't even considered but which now expressed seemed enormous and real. Daniel pulled Leo into a hug, whispering reassuring words in the boy's ear. But Caroline could see that he too was shaken, that Leo's words had touched on insecurities he tried to keep hidden. "Leo," Daniel said when the boy stopped crying, "look at Dad." Leo raised his red eyes. "I will never, never leave you, no matter what happens, no matter who comes into our lives. You are my son. You are the most important thing in the world to me, and that will never change. Understood?" Leo nodded, but Caroline could see that the seed of doubt had been planted. His friend's words had stirred deep fears, created a monster that would not be easy to exorcise. "What about Aunt Caroline?" Leo asked, looking at her. "Is she going to leave like my mom did?" The question hit Caroline like a punch to the gut. She looked at that small child, at his eyes full of fear and hope, and realized she didn't have an answer she could offer with absolute certainty. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. "I like both of you very much." "But Carly said all girlfriends say that at first," Leo replied, "and then they leave anyway." Daniel carried Leo in his arms, and suggested they go home to talk more calmly. Caroline followed them, but something had changed in the air between them. Leo's fear had materialized, dormant insecurities had placed pressure where before there had only been naturalness. At Daniel's house, which Caroline was visiting for the first time, she was greeted by a small but welcoming space. The living room had simple furniture, but everything was arranged with care. There were Leo's drawings taped to the refrigerator, photos of the two of them at various moments in their lives, a stack of children's books on a low shelf. It was a house where clearly only two people lived, where every detail had been thought of for this family of two. Caroline felt for the first time like an intruder in that sacred space. Daniel made Leo a snack and put on a movie, trying to distract him, but the boy was clearly still shaken. He clung to his father throughout the movie as if afraid he would disappear. When Leo finally fell asleep on the couch, Daniel carried him to his room. Caroline stayed in the living room, looking at the photos on the walls, trying to process what had happened. "I'm sorry about this," Daniel said when he returned. "Leo sometimes gets anxious when—" "No need to apologize," Caroline interrupted him. "He's right to be scared." Daniel looked at her, surprised by the answer. "He is?" Caroline took a deep breath before answering. "Daniel, have you ever stopped to think about what we're doing? What this really means?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that if this goes wrong, if we don't work out, it won't just be adult heartbreak. There will be a child involved, a child who has already been abandoned once." The words came out harsher than she intended, but they needed to be said. "And you think it will go wrong?" Daniel asked, his voice full of a vulnerability she rarely saw. "I don't know," Caroline replied honestly. "I want it to work. I want this more than anything I've ever wanted in my life. But what if it doesn't? What if we discover we're incompatible? What if I can't handle the responsibility of being a stepmother? What if you decide you want someone who can give you your own children?" Daniel was silent for a long moment. "Do you want to have children?" he asked. "I don't know," Caroline admitted. "I've never thought much about it. But what if I do? What if in 2 years I decide I'm pregnant and you don't want more children? What if—" "Caroline," Daniel interrupted her gently. "Stop." She looked at him, realizing she had gotten lost in a cycle of what-ifs that only led to panic. "You're scared," he said. "That's what's happening." "Of course I'm scared," she replied. "Shouldn't I be?" Daniel approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Fear is normal, but we can't live in the future, tormenting ourselves with things that may never happen." "But they can happen," Caroline insisted, "and if they do, the one who will suffer most is Leo. He'll think it's his fault that he's not enough to keep people in his life." The observation hit Daniel hard. He knew she was right, that she was touching the most sensitive wound in the whole situation. "So what are you saying?" he asked. "That we should break up now, before we hurt him even more?" Caroline felt tears burn her eyes. "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know that I can't be another person who abandons that child, and I'm afraid that, unintentionally, that's exactly what I'll end up doing." They looked at each other for a moment, the weight of their insecurities hanging between them like a dark cloud. "Caroline," Daniel said softly, "do you remember what you told me the first day we talked about Leo?" "What?" "You said you wanted to try, that we'd figure out the rest as we went." "I remember." "Then keep trying. We'll keep figuring it out as we go. Together." Caroline wanted to believe it was that simple. She wanted to go back to that place of hope and possibility where they had been for the last few weeks. But Leo's words had opened a Pandora's box she didn't know how to close. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked one last time. "What if it does?" Daniel replied. It was a fair question, but Caroline found she was more afraid of hope than of disillusionment, because disillusionment she already knew. She had already survived. Hope was new territory, scary, full of possibilities for both happiness and even greater pain. That night, Caroline left Daniel's house with more doubts than answers. There was love there. There was possibility of happiness. There was a child who had drawn the three of them together as a family. But there was also fear, responsibility, and the awareness that she had the power to break two hearts instead of just one. It was a weight she didn't know if she was ready to carry. During the drive home, Caroline couldn't stop thinking about Leo's expression when he asked if she was going to leave like his mom. There was so much vulnerability in those child's eyes, so much hope mixed with terror. And she realized that, for the first time in her life, her decisions would affect more than just herself. There was a small child who had already been hurt too much, and a man who was trying to protect his son and his own heart at the same time. The question that tormented her was simple. Did she have enough courage to risk both their hearts? Or would it be kinder to walk away now, before Leo got even more attached? Before Daniel invested even more hope in that relationship? These were adult decisions in a game where the consequences could destroy a child's innocence. And Caroline didn't know if she was prepared for such high stakes. Caroline spent 3 days avoiding the market, 3 days pretending to herself that she was too busy, that she had other priorities, that she needed time to think clearly. But the truth was simpler and more painful. She was scared. Scared of seeing the disappointment in Daniel's eyes when he realized she was pulling away. Scared of seeing Leo ask when she would come back to play. Scared of admitting that maybe she wasn't brave enough for all of this. On Wednesday night, while preparing a solitary dinner, the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hi." His voice sounded careful, as if he were walking on eggshells. "Hi," she replied. "Are you okay? I haven't seen you at the market this week." Caroline closed her eyes. There was so much delicacy in the way he asked, so much concern disguised as casualness. "I'm fine. Just busy with work." "I understand." A pause. "Leo asked about you today. He wanted to know if you were sick." The information hit Caroline like a stab. Leo was worried about her, was creating theories about why she had disappeared, exactly the kind of situation she wanted to avoid. "How is he?" she asked, genuinely concerned. "Better. We talked a lot about what happened at school. He understood that Carly was just repeating things she heard, that not everything people say is always true." "That's good." Another silence. Caroline could feel Daniel trying to decide whether or not he should say what he was really thinking. "Caroline," he finally said, "if you want to back out, I understand. I know it's a lot of complication. Just tell me. Don't disappear without an explanation." The honesty in his voice broke her a little. Here was a man who had been abandoned, who had seen a child suffer with abandonment, asking only for honesty. He wasn't trying to convince her to stay, wasn't using emotional blackmail. He was just asking for clarity. "It's not that," Caroline said, and realized it was true. "I don't want to back out. I'm just processing." "Processing what?" Caroline took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Processing the fact that I care about both of you more than is safe. Processing that if this goes wrong, it won't just be my heart that breaks." "And that scares you." "It terrifies me," she admitted. Daniel was silent for a moment, and she could almost see him thinking, choosing his words carefully. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course." "When Leo's mum left us, I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Not for myself, but for him. I thought it was too risky to let anyone into our lives, that it was my responsibility to protect him from more disappointments." Caroline listened in silence. "But you know what I discovered? That living in fear doesn't protect anyone. It just makes us miss opportunities to be happy. And Leo deserves to see that love exists, that not everyone leaves. "What if I leave?" Caroline asked, her voice small. "What if you don't?" It was the same question he had asked at his house, but this time Caroline was in a different place to hear it. This time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that things could work out. "I want to see you both," she said. "I miss you." "We miss you too." On Friday, Caroline returned to the market. Leo ran to her as soon as he saw her, hugging her legs tightly. "Aunt Caroline, were you sick? Dad said you were working a lot, but I thought you might have a fever." "I wasn't sick," Caroline said, crouching down to his level. "I was just thinking about some important things." "What kind of things?" Caroline looked at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. "I was thinking about how much I like both of you, and how much I want to be part of your family." Leo's eyes lit up. "Really? You want to be part of our family?" "I do," Caroline replied, and realized it was absolutely true. "If you want me to be." "I do," Leo shouted too loudly for a market. "Dad, she wants to be part of our family." Daniel smiled, a smile that mixed relief, joy, and something that looked suspiciously like suppressed tears. "I heard," he said. It was then that Robert appeared. Caroline saw him before the others, walking between the stalls with the same arrogance as always, this time alone. Her stomach automatically clenched, even knowing there was nothing left between them, even being happy somewhere else. "Well, look who it is," Robert said when he got close, his fake smile in place. "Little Caroline playing happy family." Daniel, who still hadn't understood who this man was, instinctively stepped closer, placing himself between Robert and Leo. "Excuse me," Daniel said, polite but firm. "Ah, you must be the boyfriend," Robert said, looking Daniel up and down. "The market dad she picked up." Caroline felt anger rise, but before she could respond, Daniel spoke. "And you must be the ex who cheated on her," he replied calmly. "The coward who lost the best thing he had." Robert laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "The best thing? You don't know her well enough yet. When you do, you'll see she's too needy, too clingy, that she wants to control everything." "Dad," Leo whispered, tugging on Daniel's shirt. "Why is that man talking to Aunt Caroline? Like that?" It was Leo's voice that broke the tension. Caroline looked at that small child, confused and scared by the aggression of an adult he didn't understand, and something inside her ignited. "Robert," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "Leave." "I'm just observing," Robert replied. "It's interesting to see how you've lowered yourself from a businessman to a... What do you do, man? Sell fruit?" Daniel didn't respond to the provocation, but Caroline saw his fists clench. "Yes," she said loud enough for other people to hear. "He sells fruit, and he's 10 times the man you ever were. He's honest, he's kind, he's present. He doesn't cheat, he doesn't lie, he doesn't humiliate." "Caroline," Daniel murmured, trying to calm her. "No," she said, looking directly at Robert. "He needs to hear this. You lost the right to comment on my life the moment you decided your secretary was more interesting than your girlfriend, and now you come here in front of a child trying to humiliate me, trying to humiliate a man who is worth more in his little finger than you are worth entirely." Robert had lost his arrogant smile. Other people in the market were starting to look, and he clearly didn't like the attention. "You'll regret it," he said softly, "when he gets tired of supporting you, when he finds out you're not even fit to be a stepmom." It wasn't Caroline who responded this time, it was Daniel. "Never again," he said, his voice low but filled with an authority that made Robert take a step back. "Never speak to her like that again, never come near her again, and never speak like that in front of my son." "What son?" Robert asked maliciously. "Oh, that's right. You've got a little add-on. Must be tough to find a woman with a kid in tow." He didn't finish the sentence. Daniel took a step towards him, and there was something in Daniel's gaze that made Robert realize he had crossed the line. "Leave," Daniel said. "Now." Robert looked around, realizing that several people were watching the scene, that he had become the villain of the story. He shrugged, trying to feign indifference. "Not worth it," he mumbled, and walked away. When he disappeared among the stalls, Caroline realized she was trembling. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" She looked at Leo, who was clinging to his father's leg, clearly scared by the whole situation. "Leo," she said, crouching down again, "are you okay?" "Why did that man talk like that?" Leo asked. "Was he mean?" Caroline looked at Daniel, unsure how to respond. "Sometimes," Daniel said, "hurt people try to hurt other people. It's not right, but it happens." "He hurt you, Aunt Caroline?" Leo asked. "He did hurt me," she replied honestly. "But now I have both of you to protect me." Leo seemed to like the idea of being a protector. "I won't let anyone be mean to you," he declared seriously. "Thank you," Caroline said, hugging him. That afternoon, after the market closed, the three of them went to Daniel's house. It was Caroline's second time there, but this time she felt different. No longer an intruder, but someone who belonged in that space. They made dinner together, Daniel cooking, Caroline chopping vegetables, Leo helping to set the table. There was something deeply comforting in that domestic routine, in that sense of normalcy after the morning's storm. After Leo went to sleep, Caroline and Daniel stayed in the living room, finally alone, to process what had happened. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For defending me, for defending Leo, for not letting him humiliate me." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't need defending. You defended yourself, and it was incredible. I just couldn't let him talk about Leo that way." Caroline moved closer to him on the couch. "He said some true things, you know." "Like what?" "About me being needy, clingy, about wanting to control everything. Those are flaws I have." Daniel looked at her seriously. "Everyone has flaws, Caroline. I do too. I'm stubborn. Sometimes I overprotect Leo too much. I have trouble trusting. But that doesn't mean we don't deserve love. What if I don't know how to be a stepmom? What if I can't handle the tantrums, the sicknesses, all the responsibilities that come with it?" "What if you do know?" Daniel replied. "What if you're exactly what we need?" Caroline looked at him, at that man who had entered her life pretending to be a boyfriend and had become so much more than that. "I love you," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Daniel was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on hers. "I love you too," he replied, "and Leo loves you too." "How do you know?" "Because today, when that man left, he asked me if you were going to leave too. And when I said that you weren't, he said that was good, because you're the coolest person he knows, besides me." Caroline laughed, feeling tears of relief stream down her face. "He really said that?" "He did. And then he asked if you could live with us." "And what did you say?" Daniel smiled. "I said that was a conversation we'd have to have with you." Caroline looked around the small but cozy living room, imagined her things mixed with theirs, imagined waking up every morning knowing she was part of that improvised but real family. "That's a conversation I'd like to have," she said. And for the first time since she had met Daniel, Caroline didn't feel afraid of the future. She felt hope. 6 months later, Caroline woke up to the smell of pancakes and the familiar sound of Leo trying to convince his dad that it was perfectly normal to put ice cream on pancakes for breakfast. "But Dad, it's Sunday. Sunday is a special day. Every day you say is a special day," Daniel replied, amused. "Yesterday was special because it was Saturday, the day before yesterday because it was raining." Caroline smiled even before she fully opened her eyes. That had become the soundtrack to her mornings. The morning negotiations between father and son, always full of creative logic from Leo and infinite patience from Daniel. She got out of the bed she had now shared with Daniel for 3 months, ever since she officially moved into the house that had truly become theirs. It hadn't been an easy transition. Leo spent 2 weeks testing the new boundaries. Daniel was nervous, trying to balance his relationship with fatherhood, and Caroline discovered that raising a child was much more challenging than she had imagined. But it was also much more rewarding. "Good morning, family," she said, entering the kitchen and kissing Leo's head first, then Daniel's lips. "Aunt Caroline!" Leo shouted, as if he hadn't seen her in weeks instead of hours. "Convince Dad that ice cream for breakfast is a good idea." Caroline pretended to consider seriously. "And what flavor would that be?" "Chocolate, obviously." "Obviously," she agreed. "But how about a deal? Pancakes now, ice cream for dessert after lunch?" Leo frowned, clearly doing complicated calculations in his head. "Can I choose the ice cream flavor?" "You can." "And can I have 2 scoops?" "1.5, Caroline negotiated. "Deal!" Leo shouted, clapping his hands. Daniel laughed, shaking his head. "How do you make that look so easy?" he asked Caroline as he served the pancakes. "Practice," she replied, "and socially acceptable bribery." It was true. In recent months, Caroline had learned that being a stepmother was a delicate art of negotiation, patience, and creativity. There were difficult days, moments, when Leo tested how far he could go with her, moments when she felt insecure about how to react. But there were also moments like this, when everything seemed to fit together perfectly. "What are we doing today?" Leo asked, attacking his pancakes with the typical enthusiasm of an 8-year-old. "We could go to the park," Daniel suggested. "Or the mall," Caroline added. "Or," Leo said, with that twinkle in his eye that usually meant he had come up with something elaborate, "we could go visit Grandma Rose." Caroline and Daniel exchanged glances. Grandma Rose was the elderly neighbor who had become a mother figure to Daniel after his own mother died, years before Leo was born. She had been one of the most enthusiastic people about their relationship, and Leo loved visiting her because she always had hidden candies and interesting stories. "That's a great idea," Daniel agreed. "It's been a while since we visited Grandma Rose. And I can show her the new drawing I made." Leo jumped from his chair, excited. "It's all of us at the beach." "When did you draw us at the beach?" Caroline asked, curious. "Last night. It's for when we go on a vacation," Leo explained, as if it were obvious. Caroline looked at Daniel, surprised. They had vaguely discussed maybe taking a small trip during Leo's school break, but nothing had been decided yet. "Leo's already planning our honeymoon," Daniel explained, smiling. "Honeymoon?" Caroline repeated. "It's not a honeymoon," Leo corrected, returning to the table. "It's a family moon. It's different." "And how do you know about honeymoons?" Caroline asked, amused. "Carly explained it to me. It's when married people travel together to be happy." "And a family moon?" "It's when people who love each other travel together to be happy. But they take their kids with them," Leo explained, as if he were teaching something very basic. Caroline felt her heart warm. There was so much simple wisdom in the child's words, so much ability to redefine adult concepts in a way that made sense for his reality. After breakfast, they got ready to visit Rose. It was a ritual Caroline had learned to appreciate. The slow, unhurried Sundays where they could simply exist as a family. Rose lived 2 blocks away in a small house with a flower-filled garden. She was a 70-year-old widow who had raised 5 children on her own and now collected borrowed children from the neighborhood. Daniel was one of her favorites, and Leo was clearly her special little guy. "My beautiful family!" she exclaimed when she opened the door, hugging each of them. "Caroline, dear, you're radiant." "Thank you, Rose," Caroline replied, returning the warm hug. It was true. She felt radiant. The past few months had transformed not only her life, but her way of seeing herself. She had discovered reserves of patience she didn't know she possessed, had learned to love differently. Not just a man, but a child. Not just a relationship, but an entire family. "Grandma Rose!" Leo ran to hug the old woman. "I brought you a new drawing!" "Oh, how wonderful! Let's see." They settled into Rose's cozy living room, filled with family photos and objects that told decades of stories. Leo proudly showed his drawing, 3 stick figures on the beach, with a yellow sun and blue waves, all smiling. "It's beautiful, my love," Rose said, examining the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. "Are you really going to travel?" "We are," Leo replied with conviction. "And it's going to be a family moon." Rose laughed, looking at Daniel and Caroline. "A family moon? What an interesting concept." "Leo's creation," Daniel explained. "He decided that's what families do." "And he's right," Rose said. "Family is about being together no matter how or where." Caroline watched the scene. Leo showing every detail of the drawing, Daniel smiling proudly, Rose giving complete attention to that child as if he were the most important thing in the world. There was so much love in that small room, so much genuine care. "Caroline," Rose said when Leo went to the garden to play, "can I tell you something?" "Of course." "Thank you," the old woman said simply. "For what?" "For saving my boys." Caroline looked at Daniel, confused. "I didn't save anyone." "You did," Rose insisted. Daniel was hiding from the world, convinced he couldn't afford to be happy because he had to protect Leo. And Leo was growing up thinking family was just him and his dad, that he couldn't dream of more than that. Caroline felt her eyes well up. "They saved me too," she said. "I was lost before I met them." "That's how true love works," Rose replied. "Everyone saves everyone." At that moment, Leo ran back inside, animated. "Grandma Rose, do you have a hose? I want to water the flowers." "I do, my love. It's in the corner of the garden." Leo ran off again, and Rose turned to Daniel. "And you, my son, how are you feeling about all this?" Daniel looked at Caroline before answering. "Scared," he admitted, "but it's a good kind of scared, like you said to Rose." "You deserve it," Rose said firmly. "Both of you deserve it, and Leo deserves to have a mom." The word hung in the air. Mom. Caroline had never thought of herself in those terms, but she realized that was exactly what she was becoming. Not Leo's biological mother, but someone who loved him unconditionally, who cared for him, who wanted to see him grow up happy and safe. "I'm still learning," Caroline said. "All mothers are always learning," Rose replied, "even biological ones. Being a mother is about love and presence, not about perfection." When they returned home that evening, Caroline sat on the small living room couch, watching Daniel help Leo with his school homework. It was a common scene happening almost every day, but it still moved her. She thought about how her life had changed since that first encounter at the market, when she had asked Daniel to pretend to be her boyfriend. Now he wasn't pretending anymore. He really was her partner, her companion, her love. And Leo was no longer just his son. He was the boy who called her to watch movies, who saved his best drawings to show her, who sought her out when he was sad or confused. He was her family. "Aunt Caroline," Leo said suddenly, dropping his pencil, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "Why do I call you Aunt Caroline if you're almost my mum?" The question caught everyone by surprise. Daniel stopped reviewing the homework. Caroline felt her heart race. "What would you like to call me?" she asked carefully. Leo thought for a moment, with the seriousness of someone considering an important decision. "Can I just call you Mom, Caroline? That way you're not like my other mom, but also not just an aunt." Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. There was so much wisdom in that child, so much ability to find creative solutions to complex situations. "I would love for you to call me that," she replied. "Cool," Leo shouted. "Mom Caroline, can you help me with my math homework?" "I can," she replied, and for the first time the word mom associated with her didn't sound strange or scary. It sounded right. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Caroline and Daniel stayed in the small kitchen, washing dinner dishes and talking about the day. It was a simple domestic routine that had become precious to both of them. "How does it feel being called Mom?" Daniel asked, drying a plate. "Scared," Caroline admitted, "but it's a good kind of scared. Like you said, to Rose." Daniel smiled. "You're an amazing mom, you know. I'm still learning. I'm still learning to be a dad, too. We'll learn together." Caroline thought about how different they were from the people who had met at the market months ago. She was no longer the broken woman who had been cheated on, insecure about her own worth. Daniel was no longer the scared man, hiding behind the responsibility of raising his son alone. They had become a family, not perfect, not without challenges, but real and full of love. "Daniel," Caroline said, as they put away the clean dishes. Thank you. For what?" "For pretending to be my boyfriend that day." Daniel laughed, pulling her into an embrace. "Thank you for asking me to pretend." "We're not pretending anymore," Caroline observed. "No," Daniel agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Now it's real." And it was. More real than anything Caroline had ever experienced. A family built on honesty, genuine love, the daily choice to stay and fight through the difficult moments and celebrate the good ones together. When they went to sleep that night, Caroline paused to look at Leo's room, where he slept hugging a teddy bear, his face calm and happy. On the bedside table was the drawing of the family at the beach, along with all the other drawings he had made over the months, always including the three of them, always smiling. In their bedroom, Caroline found the first drawing Leo had made for her, the three stick figures holding hands in the park, still taped to the wall. It was a reminder of where it all began, of how they had gotten there. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked Daniel as they settled into bed. "Make what?" "All of this, being happy, being a real family." Daniel pulled her closer. "I think we already have," he replied. "We're just learning to believe it's real." And there, in that small bed, in that simple house, with a child sleeping in the next room and dreams of a family moon in her head, Caroline finally understood what it meant to be home. It wasn't about a perfect place or a life without problems. It was about people who chose to stay together, who chose to love each other even when it was difficult, who built something new and beautiful from broken pieces of the past. It was about a man who sold fruit, and a child who drew families, and a woman who had learned to believe in love again. It was about pretending for a day and discovering that what seemed like a lie was, in fact, the greatest truth of their lives. If this story touched your heart, like, comment, and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The end.